I actually want to talk a little bit about how we did things before Marvelous Designer was there. And there's a bit of I think there's a bit of an art that is getting lost a little bit, which is funny because like 3D hasn't actually been around for like a while, but like we're already at the point that I feel as if there are old ways of working that are kind of getting lost with time a little bit, since things just change so quickly in our industry and with new technology and stuff. There's a bit of an art of sculpting folds, I believe, that is that we are kind of losing with time a little bit. So I just wanted to show you guys how we did things beforehand. Now, I'm not going to give you guys a class as to how to sculpt folds, but we can certainly do that at some point. I think that could be a very interesting topic. But essentially, of course, before Marvelous Designer was there, we had to sculpt everything. Everything had to be done completely from scratch. It was super important then, while we were actually doing that, to really develop really strong knowledge of folds, which is kind of where all the content, or where the knowledge on fold anatomy that I personally have kind of more or less comes from. Now, this is a character from Deus Ex, from Mankind Divided, which is the last project I worked on that was not using Marvelous Designer, essentially. So we had to essentially sculpt everything there. Now, back then, I didn't understand folds as well as I understand them now, but I kind of understood them in a way that's a bit more perhaps implicit or indirect. I kind of understood all the concepts of like, okay, well, folds, they have to create all these diamond folds and like stuff like that. If I like zoom in on the pants here, perhaps we can kind of take a look at that here, So like, I certainly understood all the concept of like diamond folds and like stuff like that, and we really kind of did our best to try and sculpt the most naturalistic folds that we could. But also at the same time, as you can see, a lot of these diamonds here, they're very perfectly diamond-ish, since just like with everything related to 3D art, I think we have a tendency to also kind of idealize a little bit the shape of things. But that perhaps would be a topic for like a different time, So like all of the thing between like memory folds that we have talked about previously on Outgang.studio, and in which we certainly have a class. So the class, the theoretical class on cloth and fold anatomy, like really does a beautiful breakdown of like all of these things. But like back then, like we had to like study these things and really develop knowledge there that was even more explicit, because we couldn't rely on Marvelous Designer, of course, to give us great simulation to work off of. So everything had to be completely sculpted from scratch. But for the most part, I've always thought that like, fold sculpting has always simply been one of the things I've always kind of enjoyed to do. I think it takes a very specific mind to enjoy it though, because like fold sculpting is actually quite, it can be quite time consuming, and there's like this really high attention to detail that you kind of need to be able to do that properly. But at the same time, I find it very relaxing, It's like those of us who know how to do retopology, how to do UVs, Like if you talk to a lot of seniors, there's a lot of seniors who are like, yeah, I just really love to do like retopology and like UVs and stuff. Not just seniors, there's a bunch of juniors too that do that, of course. But like there's maybe this misconception that like somehow these things, people usually don't enjoy them. And I mean, I certainly think that there's a lot of people who don't enjoy to do retopology and UVs, but you'd be surprised how many 3D artists actually enjoy those things that are a bit more could seem monotonous on the surface. And I think that fold sculpting is kind of one of those. There's something that's actually very interesting, very liberating about sculpting folds. I think someone has their microphone open. I think we're hearing people in the background. If you don't mind, I'll just go ahead and I'll just mute you here, but you could unmute yourself if ever you want to talk. Yeah, so essentially folds, for me, it's something that's I've always kind of liked, and I always thought I was kind of good at it. There's a funny thing that kind of happened related to that. When I went for my interview at Guerrilla Games, there was a moment where we were actually going through my portfolio, and during the interview, the people there who had interviewed me, the topic changed to cloth sculpting at some point, and just stuff related to cloth, and they were actually looking at this character, and some of the people there, so I won't say who, but some of the people there, if you do listen to this, you know who you are, told me something that was very interesting. He told me like, yeah, like I think you know Marvelous Designer really well. I can see this character here that you have made. I can see like all the bits that are very Marvelous Designer-ish, you know, that sort of came out of the software and stuff. Like he could see the Marvelous Designer simulation through this garment that you guys are looking at right now. And then I kindly reminded him at the end, well, I actually hand sculpted everything. Like there's no Marvelous here at all. Like it's all hand sculpted. And I kind of at that time more or less admitted that I had not touched Marvelous Designer in any point before. So like I've actually personally only learned Marvelous Designer these last few years because before I used to hand sculpt pretty much everything. And when I told them like, yeah, I like there's no way I did this inside of Marvelous because I don't even know the software. And their reaction to that was, oh, well, I think we really need you then. Because I think that they saw the fact that, like, if you're really great at sculpting folds, like, all of the knowledge that you need is there, you know, like how to sculpt folds, like how do folds get created, what makes folds look good and bad, you know? So at that point, even if you don't know Marvelous Designer, like the software itself, but you show that you really understand folds really well, you have knowledge there that is of a very, very high value for a different studio, you know? So maybe you don't know Marvelous, but if you're just interested by the topic of cloth and folds and stuff like that, just as a topic that is completely detached from the topic of Marvelous Designer, you will develop their knowledge that may even be more important than the knowledge related to Marvelous Designer directly, because people will simply see that you know folds at a deeper level than simply how to manipulate a piece of software, and you really understand what makes folds great or not great, you know. And at that point, if you don't know a particular piece of software, it's a very easy thing to teach, and that's been true my whole career, you know. Like that's why I say sometimes, and certainly what we were talking about last week with Guillaume about the fact that, you know, like some people sometimes they overfocus on software when they're within an interview, especially juniors. They think that they need to prove that they know different software, you know. It's like, no, we don't really care about that. Like if you show us that you understand the content that you are working on at a deeper level than simply how to manipulate a software to create it, that knowledge that you have is a way higher value and importance to a studio than whether you know, let's say, Maya, or whether you only know Blender, really. So at that point, you know, like how it usually works is we hire people, and for the first few months, we simply train them on whichever software they don't actually know, you know? So that's often how that goes. But of course, you know, in the topic of cloth sculpting, you know, like it's not something that's very all that common anymore. You can still find tutorials on how to do it left and right, but for the most part, I mean, like it's an art that is more or less getting lost, I feel like. So at some point, certainly I'll probably give you guys a class on that, because I think that it's something that's very fun to do, like how to sculpt folds. You know, like there's a few different brushes there that we will use that we have never really used in another context before. Now, I have talked about cloth and fold sculpting throughout the different classes on Outgang so far. That knowledge is already kind of there, and it's kind of spread over a few different classes there, but right now we don't have like an actual classes dedicated to that. I think that could be interesting to produce that at some point. Yeah, I guess that's kind of what I wanted to say on that. So this is what we used to do before. Now, the reason why we've kind of largely moved over to simulation software such as Marvelous Designer to start to create our garments now, you know, the reasons, they should be relatively obvious. One of the biggest drawbacks of cloth and fold sculpting is that it's hard, you know, it's highly skilled. Not a lot of people know how to do it well. There's a lot of issues too when you're working on a production. If, let's say, you are working with different artists that have learned how to sculpt folds a bit differently, you're going to have a hard time if everyone's sculpting folds to bring everyone to a consistent art style. That's one of the challenges when things are created manually, of course. But if you are using Marvelous Designer as a software, you know that the data you're going to get from it, there's a certain uniformity that you can expect in terms of style of treatment of folds, if you will, because everyone is using the same software. So there's that. But also, like, it simply is a lot harder to sculpt folds, I think, than to use Marvelous Designer. So there too, like, if you hand sculpt too many folds on production, there's a chance that the quality of these folds that will be sculpted will be of a variable quality, because different people understand folds in different ways. Not everyone is as good at sculpting folds. So you get a lot of variation in terms of the result that people get. You know, those are kind of the concerns that actually kind of go through your mind when you're lead, more than anything else, really.